So my name is Tisha Thompson, and I'm the founder and CEO of LYS Beauty. And I started the brand as a clean beauty brand. In fact, we're the first Black-owned clean makeup brand to be sold at Sephora. And I did it really out of a mission to really inspire and empower your most confident self. I really struggled after spending 15 years specifically in the beauty industry, seeing myself represented. And so I decided to create a brand where I can really see myself and empower others to be confident in themselves.
That's amazing. And Andy?
Hi, I'm Andy Krantz. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Paravel. We launched the company in 2016, and we're focused on bringing natural materials into an industry that has traditionally relied on heavy synthetics, a lot of very dirty chemicals and materials, and had a real lack of innovation for the past 3 decades. And within the 2 years following our launch, we managed to evolve from there into using using the brand as a full-fledged platform for sustainability. So really investing in material technology, recycled materials, re-engineering design from the ground up to solve issues for how people travel and how they live their daily lives with movement, but do so in a way that leaves the earth fundamentally a better place than it was when we found it.
Great. Mika?
Hi. My name is Mika. I am the VP of Brand Communications at Grove Collaborative, which is the leading sustainable consumer products company. We actually just became a public company last Friday, which is really exciting. And we're on a mission to be 100% plastic-free by 2025. So we're increasingly moving to innovative formats and formulas to move out of plastic packaging. I've been at Grove for almost 3 years and have really been inspired by the amount of progress we've made to move home and personal care out of plastic packaging. And I'm excited to be here today.
Great. Well, you guys were all really early movers in thinking about value-aligned sustainable businesses in very different ways. I'd love to hear, as more and more brands come into the sustainable space, what was the kind of trigger for you or the thought process on I want to create something that's more value-aligned or sustainable or clean from an environmental perspective that made your product differentiated in the market? But what was the early signal for you?
So I'll start. I think for me, what was really important was I wanted to create a brand that I could be proud of. I also wanted to create a brand that gave people options, and I wanted to come at it from a lens of diversity. And so sustainability is a major platform in our brand. We want to make sure that we're using less plastic, we're reducing our carbon footprint, but we're also creating a product that's affordable. So for me, I felt like when I really focused on what was out there for clean that was talking to the multicultural consumer, I struggled to find a brand that really was able to do all of those things. So I wanted to create a brand that really prioritized each of those areas and show that you don't necessarily have to compromise. You can have really, access to all of it.
Andy?
Yeah, for us, it was really an existential question. It's at the root of our business line. Travel is incredibly heavy in most forms from a carbon emission standpoint, and yet most times we're traveling to places that are the very sites that those emissions are increasingly endangering and threatening with extinction, right? So for us, the idea of not having sustainability and the earth in mind as our number one customer was it was something we couldn't even fathom, and I think for us it's really been that guiding true north throughout the process, because ultimately if we're encouraging people to engage in this behavior, which we think is fundamentally better for the earth, right? We believe people become better people through travel and new exploration. We have a responsibility to then think about how we can make that experience not only not be harmful to the environments we're encouraging people to travel to, but actually end up with a net positive impact.
Mika, you kind of come from you started in the women's health space very early on. Now you've gone into Grove with the acquisition. What was it for you that was the early signal when you first started in women's health?
Well, I think that for me, what was really interesting, and this was almost 10 years ago now, which is kind of hard to believe, when you looked at the women's health space and you looked at the sexual wellness and period care products, I was so stunned by how terrible the ingredients were in products that were going in such an intimate part of your body. So the idea to recreate and reinvent how these products were made and what they were manufactured with, and even doing simple things like actually disclosing the ingredients, which a lot of these products don't actively do, was just kind of a no-brainer to me. And I think in the last 10 years, the idea of sustainability has evolved so much. So when you think about somewhere like Grove, we're not just creating products that have healthier ingredients. We're recreating products that have a lower carbon footprint, that are reusable. It's taking it so much further. And that's one thing I really love about what Grove's doing.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a long time, I was an early investor in Sustain and then a long time user of Grove. I think, I run a sustainable company. We do impact investing. We do metrics and ESG analysis for corporates and asset managers. And so everything we do in our company is always tied to sustainability. Everyone jokes that when you join our firm, you get a reusable coffee cup. And if you come into the office with a single-use coffee cup, I'll chase you down. And I'm TSA. I'm like, you drink it or you throw it out, So I think it's important to have more brands and more options in the market where you feel like your values are aligned. Travel's a really interesting one because, it's really tied to carbon emissions. So I'd love to hear what you guys are most proud about. Like, what was a moment for you or something about the brand that you felt like, wow, this really stands for who I am, or this is an achievement for us that I'm just super excited about. And, you've done so much in diversity and inclusion for, a better cost of a product. So I'd love to hear how you think about it in your brand.
I think what I'm most proud is that I have an opportunity to, really allow other people who want to get into the space or maybe have a brand and haven't had the opportunity to secure retail distribution to really show, a difference in diversity and inclusion and really opening the conversation and equity when it comes to brand ownership. So I think I'm most proud being the first Black-owned clean makeup brand to be sold at Sephora is a huge undergo because so many brands really want that opportunity, and having been the first, now it gives us an opportunity to show that there's a demand, consumers want it, and more brands can come in. So I'm really excited and proud of that because I think the best place and the best way for us to really continue to expand when we talk about this conversation is giving consumers options. And it's really hard for them to make a choice when there's nothing that serves them. Yeah. And so that's what I'm extremely proud about.
What was that like when you went into Sephora to try and get that meeting? And when they're like, okay, we're going to bring you in, what did you do to celebrate?
I get this question a lot. And, I spent 15 years in the space prior, really building my career, building brands, taking them around the globe, retailer relations. So it wasn't my first rodeo. And so I think that played a big part in their decision, right? They're bringing in a brand that they know, even though it's a brand new brand, they're investing in me as a person, in the experience that I have and that I'm going to bring to the table out of the gate. So I think that played an important role as well. But I think we're solving a problem and we're answering, a solution that we're offering a solution that people really want. And so I think it was just a combination of both. And so when we met after a couple of meetings, but it was one of those things where it was a match made in heaven and it just made sense. And I'm really excited for the work that they're doing to really be able to pledge more space to Black-owned brands because I think it's really important. that we allow brands, to have that, same opportunity.
Well, congratulations. How about you when you were building Paravel? What were you most excited about or most proud of?
Yeah, I think for us, there was a real inflection point around when our launch of wheeled luggage, which we call the Aviator. And we had tremendous customer demand for wheeled product. We did not have it for the first 2.5 years that we were a company. And we had a prototype that was 80% of the way ready to go into production. It was really beautiful. But we really kept running into a question that my co-founder and I kept asking ourselves of, is this good enough, right? Is this not, it's beautiful, it's solving a lot of technical problems, it has great performance, but from a sustainability standpoint, do we really feel like this is changing the game and really moving the needle? And we ultimately decided to scrap it. We started over. It took us another 2 years of R&D to get the product that we ultimately launched into the market. It was the first 100% carbon neutral piece of wheeled luggage in the world. It was also, for us, it was an incredible process because we were working with the world's leading manufacturers in the most high-tech machinery globally, and yet we were continuously told, you can't use this material, you can't use that material. Recycled materials don't work in luggage because of the particular requirements for strength and durability for it as a commodity. So ultimately, that process, I think, was what I would say is most emblematic of who we are as a brand, in that there's a lot more that we do behind the scenes that people don't see than there is that we actually bring forward, and that it's also a process for us about using the brand as a way to create an outsized impact, right? So because we did that work to engineer a way to use recycled polycarbonate within a hard shell wheeled luggage, now other brands are able to tap into that technology and leverage it as a platform. So that's really what we see, what we're looking for.
That's really cool. I want you guys to install a Fitbit for carbon tracking while you travel in your luggage. So I can just track my team's carbon and offset it as they travel for work. Yeah. I feel like that could be a new product line. Yeah.
It's it's a lot of heavy tech in there, but
it's okay. We can figure this out.
We'll put it in the pipeline.
Yeah, sounds good. Mika, what were you most kind of proud of in building Sustain, and then now at Grove, what are you excited about?
Most proud of in building Sustain, I think, has really just been building what is now the sexual wellness category. So I think I remember almost 7 or 8 years ago, Sustain was the first brand of lubricant on Home Shopping Network, which was a really, really fun and funny experience. But now today, flash forward, you see vibrators being sold in Sephora and Ulta, and this idea of sexual wellness is so mainstream. I'm sure there's still a lot of hurdles, but compared to where it was 10 years ago when we were getting started, it's just night and day. And that just makes me so, so happy and so proud. At Grove, the thing that I'm most proud of is when we put together this idea to be plastic free by 2025, half of our business is our own products that we build and create and sell, and half of our business is a marketplace. And so by making this commitment that's very aggressive, we actually have gotten over 75 brands to pledge with us a similar commitment. Big brands like Method and Mrs. Meyer's and Seventh Generation, who are all sold on Grove's site, have to sort of meet this moment. And I've also seen incredible commitments from retailers like Target and other big CPG companies sort of follow in our footsteps. And I think that at Grove is the biggest impact we can have, is not just doing it ourselves, but also getting the biggest companies in the world to come along with us.
That's great. I mean, I still remember when you guys gave the pitch on Sustain, and I can't even imagine what that fundraise was like, going into a bunch of male-dominated VCs being like, do I have the lubricant for you?
Wasn't easy.
I remember.
I'm
some
sure
of
it
these
still
conversations.
isn't easy, but
Yeah.
it really wasn't
You're
easy.
like, let me
10
tell you what's in a tampon. Yeah. And I was like, this is an interesting story. Like, I'm in. But it's really cool to see what all of you guys are building and doing. Obviously, sustainable brands, and you look around the room today, and there's so many more options and ideas coming out there. We're going to do a quick fire round. Do you have one? I'll give you like 30 seconds to think about this. But what do you think is going to be the next big thing across sustainable brand? Is it an industry that you think's lagging? I mean, you work with so many different brands at Grove. You're in there at Sephora seeing the other kind of beauty brands. Obviously, the travel has really not been, you have like the big brands like Ramoa Away made a big impact, but there hasn't been a lot around sustainability of travel. So, in your industry, different industry, what do you think is going to be a big movement for sustainability in brands?
So I think it's going to be twofold and continue to go this route in the beauty space, is also focusing on the ingredients and the sourcing and making sure that we're ethically sourcing ingredients as best as possible. So I think that that's going to be something that brands are going to continue to double down on, potentially manufacture their own products or own their manufacturing process so that they can truly identify what's being put in their products, because far too often a lot of times you don't necessarily know if something's being created in states and states away. It's hard for you to truly analyze unless you're constantly there. So I think that's going to be something that brands are going to continue to take a lot more seriously. I also think that in terms of packaging, you're going to start to see brands be a lot more aware and conscious of the products that how they package their products, how they use them, the inks that they use, and their just folding cartons even, things that people just don't think about. Like you said, just single-use products and recyclability and all of those elements. I think the challenge we do face that we don't talk a lot about is the cost. And it's extremely costly for brands. And the reality is the consumer, at least based on what studies are showing us, they don't want to pay more. They're actually demanding less, and you got inflation and all of these elements that we're faced with. So I think that it makes it tough, right? I think we know the right thing and the good that we all want to do, but I think you have a real true challenge when it comes to the nature of a business at the end of the day is to make money.
Yeah.
And so how do you really juggle and balance a lot of those things you want to do versus what you practically can afford to do?
Yeah, and Andy, you touched on that a little bit earlier on the cost and building a really beautiful product. But what are your thoughts on industry? And also, I actually want to hear, like, as the travel industry opens back up, how do you think about expanding Paravel as a brand? Is it same products, expanding into other kind of travel adjacent ideas? What's kind of next as well?
So all of the above, right? But for us, we're very focused on creating and putting out product into the world only if it's really, we truly believe in it. We really feel like it solves a true need. So we're not interested in going into a category, we're not going to have 30 different types of carry-ons and 20 different colorways. We're interested in evaluating, different manufacturing models that can offer the customer personalization and more choice without necessarily requiring the heavy load from a production capacity where brands end up, effectively junking the goods at the end of a life cycle. So I think for us, we're really focused, where I'm really focused with Paravel for the next 12 months, is the accumulation of a project we've been working on for a while, which is really reshoring innovation and bringing back to the domestic market supply chains that simply don't exist anymore. So both for an emissions reasons, for traceability reasons, and for a holistic ethos we have around how we believe our relationships with our factories and our factory workers should exist in this framework. We're doing a tremendous amount of work to stand back up facilities that just for the past 20 years have not been feasible to operate or really run.
Awesome. Mika.
It's hard for me to think about what's next because there's so much still to do in what we really talk about all the time at Grove, which is the plastic crisis. And I worry about costs rising and inflation because it will sort of damper innovation. Since being at Grove, like I can't go into my shower, my cabinet, like everywhere you go. I mean, even here, it's so like there are all these amazing products, and so many are still packaged in plastic.
And I don't know how many people know this, but it takes actually a lot of oil to make plastic. There's oil in plastic. So as oil prices increase, plastic production is a major issue for inflation. So, you can cut it out, but cutting out plastic is more complex than I think people sometimes realize, or the process to make it.
Yeah, and there's so much still to do to educate consumers about, like, what I think about is kind of like going back to basics. I mean, I don't know when I started using body wash, but I probably when I was a teenager, and there is nothing better about body wash than bar soap. And so there are moments where rising costs will create problems, but I think there are also things like bar soap that are actually cheaper to make, don't need plastic packaging, lighter to ship. Grove launched last year laundry detergent sheets, same story. And there is a lot of innovation that we can do that is cheaper and not using plastic. So I just think there's still so much work to do there on the plastic front.
Totally.
So I'd love to touch on that just because I think there's one thing that runs through this entire industry and through all brands is what sustainability means, right? It's really been routed out as a term. And there's trade-offs no matter which pathway you choose, which is something I would want people to know really clearly. So, for example, when we think about our product, there are elements of our wheeled luggage that are still made from virgin plastics. If we chose to make them out of recycled plastics, the useful life of that product would be cut by 75%. We're doing the engineering work to try to get it to resolve those problems, but it becomes a question of, okay, so are we trying to eliminate plastic, or are we trying to reduce production as much as possible? And it's no matter which route you pick, you're going to end up having to make compromises. And so I do think, I love what you guys are doing, but there's also an element for me that is about when it comes to consumer education, it's tough because we're all educating the consumer differently. And I think there's a lot with the evolution of the circular economy that will be interesting.
Yeah,
I think reduction, what you're talking about, there's no world without plastic. In the universe, I think there's a world in certain categories where we can really move away from plastic. But creating the longevity of a product so people are using less is obviously ultimately best. But it is nuanced, and there are so many messages, which is hard for consumers. But our CEO always goes back to reduce, reuse, recycle. And, well, you can't recycle plastic a lot of the time, but you can recycle a lot of other things.
I mean, look, we look at all kinds of companies when we invest in them, and there's so many different, impact, sustainability, clean, and, diversity and inclusion, which is a huge theme for LYS Beauty. Perfect is the evil of good, right? And so if you're striving for perfection, you're just going to limit yourself. And so what we're always looking for is innovation, thoughtfulness, understanding your supply chain, understanding your consumer, understanding how you think about building your business. And, kind of throwing over the last question to you, like diversity and inclusion, even with our company Eve Blue, we are tracking all kinds of data analytics on companies. And major data providers don't really have a lot on diversity and inclusion of organizations. It's more women's pay and women and gender. And so we have to go to third-party data providers to get it. And it's still a huge challenge. Like in asset management, all the big asset management firms are taking the photos off their teams' websites and just putting the names because they're so embarrassed that there's so many old white men. I swear. BlackRock got in trouble. There's a great video on it when someone at a pension plan was like, why are there so many old white men at your firm? This isn't representative of our teachers and firemen, and so, what inspired you to really think about diversity and inclusion when building the business?
I mean, I think, for me, what was, so jarring is to know, when I read a stat that said that, people of color are 2 times more likely to be exposed to harmful ingredients, that, was shocking to me. And so I wanted to make sure that, and I had a responsibility to make sure that I created a brand that offered an option. And I feel like a lot of brands, even if you're not a Black-owned or a minority-owned company, you can still do better and you can still offer a diverse product. And I'm speaking specifically in the beauty and cosmetic space where I live. For me, I feel like you need to look, within your organization. Do you have people of color that are a part of your product development process? Do you have people of color that you're testing products on, making sure that they work well for their skin types? There's so much that, founders and owners and CEOs can do to make sure that they have a more diverse product that they're putting in the market. You see a lot of effort, but you can tell when it's not coming from an authentic and genuine place, that it's literally just a product that's kind of slapped together. And it's like, who did you test this on and who tried this? Because I don't know a single Black person that's that orange, So it's a frustrating thing for me when brands don't even try. So I think it's just important that, we diversify and give everyone that opportunity to be seen and feel represented. And it's an easy thing to do, right? It's the right thing to do. And so for me, it was just really important to make sure that I, came, from a place of authenticity and share in the very demand that I personally didn't have access to.
That's amazing. Well, we have a few minutes left. I'll open it up in case anyone has any questions in the audience. Anyone brave enough to raise their hand? No.
Being shy.
Oh, thanks. Sorry. I'm just yelling. So if you have a brand that maybe sustainability is not at the core of the brand ethos, but you want to start on that path of adding things that can make it more sustainable without it feeling inauthentic, what are some things that you think are low-hanging fruit is maybe a bad word, but that you can start to do to introduce sustainability into your brand?
I think there's, it's introducing it without necessarily needing to use it as a marketing technique, right? So it's sort of what you're doing behind the scenes. I think thinking about sustainability as in your corporate practices is one way to do it. So it's not necessarily having to go all the way to your brand. So Climate Neutral is a really wonderful company that works on certifying tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 emissions. And for us, we're a Climate Neutral certified brand. I think that's something that every company should do, regardless of whether or not their particular product they're putting out in and of itself is green.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting is a lot of the time when you do these analyses, it's not what you think. Like it may not, your ingredients may have nowhere near the carbon footprint than when consumers actually use your products. Like laundry, I'm obviously in the laundry space, but laundry detergent's a great example of that. Heating water to do your laundry is a lot more negatively impactful on the environment than having better ingredients in your laundry detergent. So it's interesting. Obviously, it can make it overwhelming, I'm sure, but sometimes there's ways that you can actually think about the problem that you weren't thinking about it before.
Well, thank you so much. This was awesome. Loved having all of you talk about your brands, and congratulations on all the success. So,
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.